Out of the massive funds specifically set aside to build the nation's future, less than a third was actually put to work. For everyday citizens, that incredibly low percentage translates to unbuilt roads, delayed hospitals, sluggish digital networks, and ultimately, totally stagnant job growth. And this long-term downward trend proves that this isn't just some one-off anomaly or a single bad year. By mid-May of the fiscal year, just a mere fraction of the budget was spent. You know what? This persistent underexecution is literally like a padlock on the nation's potential. It actively costs the country an estimated 0.5 to 0.7 percentage points of real GDP growth every single year. And while a fraction of a percent might sound kind of small on paper, in reality, that means thousands of lost jobs, stunted local businesses, and huge missed opportunities for economic advancement. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to completely unpack the mechanics behind this massive trillion-rupee macroeconomic paradox. We're going to dive into data across multiple financial agencies to understand exactly where Nepal's economy stands today. And more importantly, we'll break down the specific fiscal roadmap proposed to get things back on track. Okay, here is our roadmap for The Explainer today. We'll start with Nepal's big budget paradox, move right into the optimal budget consensus, explore 3 paths for the economy, break down funding the future, look at critical economic reforms, and finally outline the timelines and real risks. Section 1. Nepal's big budget paradox. So let's establish the core problem facing the Treasury right now. Over the last decade, the government's budget has practically doubled, ballooning to 1.96 trillion rupees this current year. But here is the massive disconnect. Think of a scale where you have this massively heavy budget allocation on one side, but a severe undercollection of revenue on the other. Revenue collection has completely stalled out, sitting way below allocation at just 1.02 trillion rupees. So you've got these massive government allocations on paper, but without the actual money coming in, and combined with the total failure to spend the development funds that do exist, the economy just simply cannot move forward. It is a textbook fiscal paradox. Section 2. The optimal budget consensus. With such a massive gap between expectations and reality, it's really fascinating to see how the major international and local financial agencies want to fix this mismatch. The Ministry of Finance initially looked at a growth focus ceiling between 1.89 and 2.15 trillion rupees. But the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, is demanding strict fiscal consolidation, which is essentially tightening the belt, anchoring the deficit at 3 to 4% of GDP and keeping public debt below 48%. The World Bank is emphasizing that structural reforms and the quality of spending must come before sheer quantity. Meanwhile, the Asian Development Bank, or ADB, is targeting investment-led growth, specifically by funding hydropower and boosting exports. Synthesizing all of those competing priorities, the sources arrive at a multi-agency optimal consensus number, a 1.95 trillion rupee budget. This specific figure restrains the overall size of the budget to actually match real revenue capacity while focusing entirely on quality execution and binding fiscal rules. And the reason this consensus matters so much is that presenting a realistic, unified budget is exactly what unlocks crucial international aid, development loans, and global trust. Section 3. 3 paths for the economy. Depending on what budget the government actually passes, the analysis outlines a real fork in the road for the future. On one side, the source outlines a status quo path, driven by an expansionary budget of 2.15 to 2.2 trillion rupees. The projected risks under this scenario include a massive revenue gap, public debt ballooning to 55% of GDP, and the very real possibility of falling onto the FATF gray list, which is an international financial watch list for jurisdictions with high financial risks. On the other side, the reform path relies on that 1.95 trillion budget. The report notes this path actively funds reforms, targets a high GDP growth of 6 to 7%, and aims to bring in robust foreign direct investment by passing legislation like the AIF Act, which is designed to make investing in the country much smoother. Section 4. Funding the future. Let's shift gears and explain exactly how this 1.95 trillion rupee pie is proposed to be sliced up. Out of that total, 38% goes to current expenditure. These are the everyday running costs and mandatory obligations that literally keep the government lights on. 24% goes to intergovernmental transfers to the provinces and local levels. Financial provisioning for debt servicing sits at 15%. But the absolutely vital piece here is capital expenditure, which is ring-fenced at exactly 23%, or 448 billion rupees. This is the money actually used to build things. It's the true engine of the economy. The mandate here is that 80% of this capital must actually be utilized to see real progress. So where exactly does that capital go? Well, infrastructure takes the lead with 80 billion rupees for completing national pride projects. Health gets 70 billion. Hydropower receives 65 billion to hit a strategic 5,000 megawatt target for energy exports. Education is allocated 58 billion. But pay really close attention to the IT and digital sector. It gets an incredibly strategic 120% boost, taking it up to 25 billion rupees. This is aimed at building digital parks and pushing IT exports from 800 million to 1.5 billion dollars. That level of digital investment is critical, right? Because a thriving IT export market provides high-paying jobs that actually help keep bright young talent in the country. Section 5. Critical economic reforms. Because let's be honest, a budget is just a piece of paper without the systemic fixes to actually collect the revenue and execute the spending. Here are the structural changes outlined by the analysis. Step 1. Broaden the tax base and mandate a cashless, digitized economy to close a massive 30% compliance gap. Step 2. The urgent passage of the AIF Act to allow for diaspora bonds, which is essentially a way for citizens living and working abroad to securely invest directly back into their home country's development. Step 3. Launch an investment express system. This would ensure a 30-day rapid approval process for foreign direct investment, clearing out the red tape that currently stifles the private sector. And this brings us to a really vital allocation in the proposal. There is a brand new, dedicated 15 billion rupee allocation aimed specifically at financial sector reform and FATF compliance. This is absolute priority funding to keep the country off that global financial gray list we mentioned earlier. Failing to maintain compliance would be devastating. It would cut global aid, freeze investment flows, and make it incredibly difficult for everyday citizens and local businesses to send or receive money internationally. Section 6. Timelines and real risks. There is a serious ticking clock on these reforms. The timeline proposed is strict. In the immediate 0 to 3 months, the government must abolish the unallocated or ABANDA budget and really intensify anti-money laundering or AML operations. Within 3 to 12 months, they need to activate public-private partnerships or PPP pipelines, where the government and private sector actually collaborate on massive projects. Within 1 to 3 years, capital execution must hit that 80% target, ensuring financial compliance. If followed, the projections show that in 3 to 5 years, this traces a path to graduating the nation into a $100 billion economy. But the risks ahead are incredibly high. Looking impartially at the matrix here, the FATF gray list represents a critical threat, with a potential 150 billion rupee revenue impact. There's also the high risk of a Middle East Gulf crisis. A drop in remittances there could totally devastate the country's $8.6 billion remittance base, which countless families rely on every single month. Add in the risks of continued capital execution failure and massive revenue shortfalls, and you can easily see why adopting a unified consensus framework is viewed as so absolutely urgent by these agencies. So, what does this all mean? We are at a critical crossroads. Will the government choose an expansionary budget of over 2.1 trillion rupees, or will they adopt the 1.95 trillion rupee consensus path aimed at deep structural reform? Keep a very close eye on the actual budget vote, because the economic path chosen here will literally define the nation's financial trajectory for a generation. Thank you for joining me on this explainer.